Hello, this is Wednesday's quick tip, and what we're going to talk about today is vitamin D and how it can impact your health. I'm going to emphasize, I'm not giving medical advice. I'm going to be talking about some studies that I've read and some things that I know. You should not be getting medical advice from some random guy on the internet. You should be going to your doctor. So the purpose of the video is just to maybe help you have a better conversation with your health professional, or to help you kind of direct you in a direction to gain some knowledge that can help you or your loved ones. So, just real quick, it's been theorized for I think a couple decades now that there's a relationship between a vitamin D deficiency and the flu. Okay, so some researchers believe that getting the flu is actually a symptom of a vitamin D deficiency. Pretty sure it was I want to say it was in the 90s when that was first kind of put forth, but don't quote me on that. I've got studies that I'll link in the description. So that's been researched for a while. There's a lot of consensus about it. I don't want to say there's like 100% consensus because science doesn't work that way, but there are a lot of researchers and doctors who believe that there's a relationship between those two things. So when your vitamin D levels are good, people seem to get the flu less, and the symptoms, if they do get the flu, tend to be diminished. One of the things you have to understand about the flu is the flu never goes away. And one reason I'm bringing this up is because it's wintertime, and we're at a time of the year, we're getting into that time of year where the flu tends to spike, and nobody's really talking about the flu right now because of another virus that's going around and getting all the media attention. So we don't want to forget about the flu. Fortunately, a lot of things for the popular virus and the flu correlate as far as things you can do to protect yourself. And vitamin D actually relates to both those. So, but just understand the flu never goes away. The virus is always there, it spikes in the wintertime. And that's what led to the hypothesis that there's a relationship between that and vitamin D, because during the wintertime, in a lot of parts of the world, people tend to spend more time indoors and they tend to wear more clothes, so they just don't produce vitamin D. And producing vitamin D is a little bit trickier than people realize. Some people think if they're just outside for a bit, they'll make plenty of vitamin D. The sun has to be in the right place. It's got to be pretty high on its axis. And you have to have enough skin exposed to where your body will do that. Another factor is, depending on the pigmentation of your skin, the darker your skin is, the harder it is to make vitamin D. So, if your skin is darker, you'll have to spend more time in the sun to make vitamin D naturally. A lot of these things make it sort of not practical, so for most people I think it's best to just supplement with vitamin D and make sure you're getting it. Don't leave it to the chance that you're hopefully getting enough sunlight. Let's see here. Also, if you're wearing any kind of a sunscreen, there might be some sunscreens that have specific formulations to where they don't do this as much, but as far as I understand, basically that'll block that UV light from doing what it's designed to do, and you're not going to make vitamin D if you're out there tanning with suntan lotion on. So keep that in mind too. Now the best way, obviously, to determine if you need to supplement with vitamin D is going to be through blood work. As Jim Laval likes to say, your blood never lies, so when we're getting blood work, we're not guessing. For most people, it is considered safe to take about 5,000 IUs of vitamin D daily. There's other strategies you can do, but I would say plug into like your health care professional to see if you need to do something more extreme as far as doing like a bolus dose or something like that. But for most people, taking 5,000 IUs daily will get your vitamin D to what's considered a clinically acceptable dose, to where it's going to do what it needs to do in your body. And that leads us to some other things. So with the virus that's real popular right now, that's getting all the screen time and taking away from the flu, there's been some very interesting research that show that when people have adequate vitamin D levels, they fight off infection better. Let me put it that way. So, not saying that adequate vitamin D levels will prevent infection, but it does seem to show that adequate vitamin D levels will fight infection off better. So I'm going to butcher this word, but I'm going to try, and I'll put it on the screen so that you can read it for yourself. But cathocidins, I know I didn't say that right. cathelicidins, something like that. Again, it should be on the screen. So that is essentially a function of your immune system that only turns on if your vitamin D levels are active. So if your vitamin D, when your vitamin D levels are adequate. So if your vitamin D levels are adequate, this part of your immune system will turn on and do what it's supposed to do to fight off infection. If your vitamin D levels are not adequate, this part of your immune system won't even work. These were discovered, I think, I believe it was in the 1990s. And at first it really confused researchers because it seemed to be an inconsistent function. They didn't understand there was a relationship at first between this and vitamin D levels. So what they have determined since the discovery of cathelicidins, however that's pronounced, is that when vitamin D levels are adequate, these things turn on and they do what they're supposed to do. When vitamin D levels are low, they don't even switch on. So it's like a whole function of your immune system that won't work. I'm pretty sure this was in 2020. They did a study in Indonesia with 780 hospitalized patients who had the popular virus. And they examined them for various factors, including mortality rate, pre-existing conditions, and D3 status. So they split the group of 780 people into three groups. They had patients who had sufficient vitamin D levels, patients with insufficient vitamin D levels, and then patients with deficient vitamin D levels. Vitamin D levels. After all that data was collected, what they determined was the patients who had adequate vitamin D levels, only 4.1% of those passed away. Okay? The patients who had insufficient vitamin D levels, 85.8% of them passed away. They didn't survive and get out of the hospital. And then the patients who had deficient vitamin D levels, 98% of them passed away. So, again, none of this is medical advice, and none of this is saying that having adequate levels of vitamin D will keep you from getting sick. Just suggesting there's strong evidence that having adequate vitamin D levels can do a lot to help your body fight off infection. So, let's see here. I got a quote from one of my studies. D3 supplementation has been shown to reduce the risk of infection, lower viral replication rates, and particularly reduce concentrations of pro-inflammatory cytokines that produce the inflammation that injures the lining of the lungs. So, and a cathelicidin, I'm going to learn to pronounce that word, is a peptide produced by the epithelial cells of the respiratory tract, the gastrointestinal tract, and the skin. So I actually learned about that peptide from my friend and colleague Larry Vittetto. Pronunciation is not my superpower. Sorry, Larry. He's got a website called Life Unlearned. I'll put a link to that in the description as well. Larry has a lot of good information if you like to read and you really want to plug into something that really gets into the science and is real specific. I would recommend that website a lot. Larry's a real sharp guy. I have a lot of respect for him, so that's a great resource. And he has several articles on there that dig into the subject a lot further. So I've got some studies that I'll link in the description. Again, just a quick tip. Vitamin D is really important. If you get blood work, then you're not guessing, that's best. If you're not going to get blood work or whatever, I would at least start taking, supplementing 5,000 IUs a day. And if you get a bottle of vitamin D, I know recently there's a movement to change the dosing from international units IUs to something else. I don't actually even remember what that is, but it's really easy to figure out the difference if you just you can get online and get a calculator. That's not hard to figure out. Just do whatever that measurement is, 2 international units, and the dosing it's not complicated. So that's all for now. That's this week's quick tip. I think I used up all my words for the day. It was a bit longer than I wanted it to be, but it's a really important subject. It's something that I don't feel is getting enough attention right now. It's something proactive that you can do for your health, and it's also inexpensive. Vitamin D supplementation tends to be not expensive as supplements go. So that's it. Be healthy. Happy New Year. Thanks.